Alright, so today we are going to be reading Federalist 51. I can never remember which one is about the separate. Well, I guess it says. So this one's about checks and balances. The other one that, like, every poli-sci major, anyone taking a gov class, will read is Federalist 10, and that's about elite capture. I'm reading them because they're pretty much foundational to our government. These two, there are, I believe, 80. I don't remember. All I know is Hamilton wrote 51 of the Federalist Papers. I'm definitely probably going to read through all of them on this channel at some point, but right now, just doing the important. Again, by fire. I'm leaving for college, going up to Harvard in a few days, so just trying to burn some of this wood that we have. Also, you can see, you can't really see, but a big branch fell into our neighbor's yard, so my parents are going to have to deal with that. I can't help them with that. But before we begin, let's just deep breath and take a moment to think about fire, man's greatest invention, I think. Without it, we wouldn't have developed the energy to further develop our brains and invent other things, and so many myths about harnessing the power of fire and how it's from the gods. If you look at Prometheus, and just looking at the flames is so tantalizing and hypnotic. That's why I love making this campfire. I feel so rooted to our distant ancestors, and even to our ancestors who aren't with us, like the Homo erectus and a lot of slaves that were killed. It's very grounding, even though it's flames up in the air. I also have some watermelon, because, my people love a watermelon. But I'm going to just grab my water real quick, bring it up here. It's kind of tiring being an influencer. I'm an influencer. I influence. Okay. To the people of the state of New York, to what expedient, then, shall we finally resort for maintaining in practice the necessary partition of power among the several departments as laid down in the Constitution? The only answer that can be given is that as all these exterior provisions are found to be inadequate, so I'm sure this is talking about other things that were discussed in Federalist Papers, the defect must be supplied by so contriving the interior structure of the government as that its several constituent parts may, by their mutual relations, be the means of keeping each other in their proper balances. So if you've heard the term check and balances, this is outlining that. Without presuming to undertake a full development of this important idea, I will hazard a few general observations which may perhaps put it in a clearer light and enable us to form a more correct judgment of the principles and structures of the government planned by the convention. So he's saying that this won't have all the answers. If you look, it's actually pretty short for such a complicated topic. And then this is reference to the Constitutional Convention. If you haven't listened to the Hamilton soundtrack, I highly suggest you do. It will make all of this make more sense, and it's very digestible. Man, I'm thirsty. In order to lay a due foundation for that separate and distinct exercise of the different powers of government, which to a certain extent is admitted on all hands to be essential to the preservation of liberty, it is evident that each department should have a will of its own, and consequently should be so constituted that the members of each should have as little agency as possible in the appointment of members of the others. So pretty much what he's saying, exactly, separate but equal, and this time it has to work. And you'll see as we read this why I chose to read this now, because we have the executive branch, Donald Trump, really trying to overtake the legislative and judicial branch. He's doing a lot of things that either on paper or technically should be part of the legislative branch, like the tariff policy. I'm no constitutional scholar, but I feel like Congress is supposed to be setting taxes and stuff, and tariffs are a tax, but he's using emergency powers to allow him to do that, but the emergency is kind of made up, saying that immigration is Anyway, were this principle rigorously adhered to, it would require that all the appointments for the supreme, executive, legislative, and judiciary magistracy, you know what I'm trying to say, should be drawn from the same fountain of authority, the people, through channels having no communication whatever with one another. Perhaps such a plan of constructing the departments would be less difficult in practice than it may be in contemplation appear. Some difficulties, however, and some additional expense would extend the execution of it. Some deviations, therefore, from the principle must be admitted. So what he's saying is, in an ideal world, we'd have a government that is completely separate, but you can't do that because then they can't communicate with each other, and then you're just running like three separate countries, in my opinion. So, um, in the constitution of the Judiciary Department in particular, it might be inexpedient to insist rigorously on the principle. First, because peculiar qualifications being essential in the members, the primary consideration ought to be to select that mode of choice which best secures these qualifications. So pretty much, you kind of need to be an expert in law to be a judge. You don't want someone like Ben. Okay, well, he's not a good example because he's an actual lawyer. But you don't want what we have now, a bunch of people in the cabinet. I think Secretary of Education is a WWE exec. You don't want them to be able to sit on the Supreme Court. You want people who actually like have worked their way up. That's why I think the youngest Supreme Court members have been in their 50s, because it takes decades to get the qualifications to do that. Secondly, because the permanent tenure by which the appointments are held in that department must soon destroy all sense of dependence on the authority conferring them. So pretty much, Supreme Court, at least the Supreme Court does. I don't know about lower courts. They're lifetime appointments, which I think should be amended, but that's a different issue. It is equally evident. I'm just going to make sure I'm still recording because sometimes it randomly stops. Okay. It is equally evident that the members of each department should be as little dependent as possible on those of the others, for their emoluments extend annexed to their offices. I have a general sense of what that word means, but I'm going to look it up, sorry, using one hand. Salary, fee, or profit. Okay. Oh, okay, so they should be financially independent, I think. Were the executive magistrate or the judges not independent of the legislator in this particular, the independence in every other would be merely nominal. So if you can't like secure your own funding, then it's like you're kind of just a puppet branch, and then the people giving you money are the actual pulling the strings. But the great security against the gradual concentration of the several powers in the same department consists in giving to those who administer each department the necessary constitutional means and personal motives to insist encroachments on the others. So pretty much they need to be protected from overreach from other departments. The provision for defense must, in this, as in all other cases, be made commensurate to the danger of attack. Ambition must be made to counteract ambition. And we see this now with, this is more federal versus state, which is probably a different, maybe they talk about that later. But we see that with a lot of, Texas, well, what happened wasn't the good end goal. But when those representatives from Texas fled for redistricting, that's them kind of having their ambition counteract the executive who, oh my god, what's the governor's name? Greg Abbott, who is attacking his ambition. I think you guys understand. The interests of the man must be connected with the constitutional rights of the place. It may be a reflection on human nature that such devices should be necessary to control the abuses of government. But what is government itself but the greatest reflections of all human nature? So a government of the people, by the people, for the people. We tend to think of this government as a big amorphous thing, like big gov, but we need to remember that it is just people, and it is people who voted them in. And the problem that we have now is so much of it is captured by elites, that it does become kind of like this separate thing, separate from the people. And what it's supposed to be is everyone being able to have a voice. And right now it tends to be only the elites that have a voice. If men were angels, no government would be necessary. Yes, if angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. So pretty much we're imperfect people, so we need government for us. In framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place oblige it to control itself. So yeah, that's a difficult task. You have to have enough power to actually govern, but then not too much to become a tyranny, an authoritarian state. A dependence on the people is, no doubt, the primary control on the government, but experience has taught mankind the necessity of auxiliary precautions. So, yes, people vote in the government, but something might happen where they vote in an authoritarian populace who lies to them about everything and then tries to, I don't know, occupy the capital or something. So we need other protections. The policy of supplying by opposite and rival interests the defect of better motives might be traced through the whole system of human affairs, private as well as public. We see it particularly displayed in all the subordinate distributions of power, where the constant aim is to divide and arrange the several offices in such a manner as that each may be a check on the other, that the private interest of every individual may be sentinel over the public rights. So again, this is just talking about how important it is to have multiple branches of government that check each other, so that so when one branch is overstepping and going into overstepping our individual civil liberties, we have the other branches to keep them in place. And we're even seeing this today, even though it's a 6-3 Supreme Court. There have been decisions, at least by lower courts, I'm not so caught up in what the Supreme Court's been saying, that have thrown out like a lot of Trump's lawsuits, or like we see that with Garcia and Khalil, the representatives and senators that went to visit them and get them back. Yeah. These inventions of prudence cannot be less requisite in the distribution of the supreme powers of the state. But it is not possible to give to each department an equal power of self-defense. In Republican governments, Republicans, small r, not like the political party, but people who you have representatives, the legislative authority necessarily predominates. The remedy of this inconvenience is to divide the legislature into different branches and to render them, by different modes of election and different principles of action, as little connected with each other as the nature of their common functions and their common dependence on the society will admit. So it's saying that the legislative branch holds the most power, but to divide that, we have the House and the Senate. It may even be necessary to guard against dangers and roachments by still further precautions. As the weight of the legislative authority requires that it should be thus divided, the weakness of the executive may require, on the other hand, that it should be fortified. Now you might be wondering, weakness of the executive seems powerful, and that's true, but when it was written, the executives had way less power. It was through a series of various things, the War on Terror, the Patriot Act, where Congress kept saying, in emergencies you can do this, and then a president does it, consolidates power, and then it just keeps going and going until it becomes a powder keg ready to explode, which is what we're seeing now. An absolute negative on the legislator appears, at first views, to be the natural defense with which the executive magistrate should be armed. So I think that's just saying that a weak legislative would make the executive powerful by comparison. But perhaps it should be neither altogether safe nor alone sufficient. On ordinary occasions it may not be exerted with requisite firmness, and on extraordinary occasions it might be perfidiously abused. I don't know what that word means. I'm going to look it up. I'm guessing it means, like, a lot. Oh, okay. Yeah, so exactly what's happening now. Deceitful and untrustworthy. So let's read that again. First, an absolute negative on the legislature appears at first to be the natural defense with, but perhaps it should be neither altogether safe nor alone sufficient. On ordinary occasions, it might be exerted with the requisite firmness. So I think he's talking about the executive using the power in an appropriate way. On extraordinary occasions, it might be deceitfully abused, which is what we're seeing now. May not this defect of an absolute negative be supplied by some qualified connection between this weaker department and the weaker branch of the stronger department, so the executive's connection to the stronger legislative, by which the latter may be, so the latter would be the stronger department, may be led to support the constitutional rights of the former. So the executive supporting the constitutional rights. Sorry, this is really the way they wrote back then with all their run-on sentences is really hard to read right now. So we're piecing through it together without being too much detached from the rights of its own department. So pretty much more checks and balances between the stronger department. You guys can reread that line if you want. I want to get going. If the principles on which these observations are found be just, as I persuade myself they are, and they be applied as a criterion to the several state constitutions and to the federal constitutions, it will be found that if the latter does not perfectly correspond with them, the former are infinitely less able to bear such a test. So he's talking about, this is where he brings in the states. So if the federal government fails in its separation of powers, then at least several state governments will be able to, in my mind, resist. And that's what we're kind of seeing with California and Texas and a lot of the blue states. I want to take a break right now just to rest my voice a bit and watch by the fire. Feel free to fast forward to where you see me sit down again. I think this is... Let's see where this is pointing. There you go. Y'all can either read ahead or watch me tend the flames, or just take a break yourself. This is really dense material we're reading from hundreds of years ago, so my brain can't handle it sometimes. I have some papers I need to burn. First I want to build... Oh. You always want to be very careful with fire. I was a Boy Scout. We learned shouldn't be higher than the shortest scout's waist. Granted, that's when you have a bunch of children running around, so if you're a single adult, or with adults, doesn't really matter. Just don't be stupid. Always have someone watching the flame. Almost like how you need to always have someone watching the executive branch. Get it? It's all connected. Always has been. Now there are 3 types of fires. I only remember 2 of them. There's a log cabin. You have that's kind of what we got going on now. You have the 4 walls and then stuff in the center. And then there's TP, which is a teepee. TP, I remember you're supposed to do when it's windy, I think. I don't know, man. I'm just a guy. I'm just gonna throw a bunch of stuff on, and then put some paper on it. Get some bigger logs so it lasts longer. I know I said I'd rest my voice, but... Need a log right there. I'll do one of this old one since it should be hot enough. Burn them down to ashes. And then maybe a log right there. Hamilton wrote, the other fish, how do you write? But you're running out of time. Oh my god, am I going to get copyright struck for singing? It's so insane, guys. Then you have to wait 30 days for them to do your appeal, and I don't know what happens if they don't even look at your appeal, because it has to go to the record company. I had something playing by Marvin Gaye for 5 seconds, and it got taken down. It's insane. That's why I want you guys to join my Discord, so I can just upload post directly, but I know some of you don't have that, so I'm going to be making a website soon. It's so annoying. We just need to have actual content. Ooh, That smoke is going right to where I was sitting. Okay, it's moving. Alright. That should be enough wood for now. Let's burn, baby, burn. There we go. Also, always have a hose or water by you, just in case. I have one right there. Alright, I'm gonna eat some watermelon and then... Shit, I don't remember what paragraph we're on. You know why people love... Oh my god. Love watermelon is because once we were freed, it was some of the only fruit that we could... With, not only, but easily harvestable food. So the ones that did get land were able to farm it and harvest it, and then they made songs making fun of us, and it became a stereotype. But, alright. Okay, where were we? We're just talking about the state. Sorry. Okay, here we are. There are moreover two considerations particularly applicable to the federal system of America, which plays that system in a very interesting point of view. First, in a single republic, all the power surrounded by the people is submitted to the administration of a single government. The usurpations are guarded against by a division of the government into distinct and separate departments. So yeah, I guess that's talking about parliamentary systems, where they have like a prime minister who oversees the parliament, but it's not necessarily executive branch. I'm not too familiar with foreign systems of government, so I might be wrong about that. But in the compound Republic of America, the power surrounded by the people is first divided between two distinct governments, and then portion allotted to each subdivided among distinct and separate departments. So I think the two distinct governments are the chambers, and then we have different committees on that. Hence, a double security arises to the rights of the people. The different governments will control each other at the same time, and I don't know why he says two distinct governments if there's three branches. I'm guessing he's talking about the republic portion, which would be would be Congress, but hence a double security arises to the rights of the people. The different governments will control each other at the same time that each will be controlled by itself. Second, it is of great importance in a republic not only to guard the society against the oppression of its rulers, but to guard one part of the society against the injustice of the other part. So that would be, discrimination, slavery, which was still a thing then. I mean, discrimination still is a thing then, and technically slavery is, if you look at labor, and I won't get into all that. But wage theft is slavery because you're not getting paid, and it's the biggest form of theft in America. Anyway, different interests necessarily exist in different classes of citizens. If a majority be united by a common interest, the rights of the minority will be insecure. So kind of protecting against mob rule. There are but two methods of providing against this evil. The one by creating a will in the community independent of that majority, that is, of the society itself. I'm going to read that again. I was looking at the flames and got distracted. There are but two methods of providing against this evil, the one by creating a will in the community independent, the majority that is, of the society itself, the other by comprehending in the society so many separate descriptions of citizens as will render an unjust combination of a majority of the whole very improbable, if not impractical. So the first one is creating a will in the community independent of the majority. So that's kind of like what the Senate is. It's supposed to be a bit more elite. That's why they have longer terms. Um, One of an elitist senator described it as a cooling pot against the tempers of society or something. Um, and then this one is splitting into various different factions and various classes, which I think backfired a lot because now people are just arguing with each other instead of trying to find a solution. The first method prevails in all governments possessing an hereditary or self-appointed authority. Um, so, an authority that was passed on, so like a monarchy or something, or self-appointed. So, like if you've heard of divine right of kings, kings saying that God said that they should rule. This, at best, is but a precarious security, because the power of independent of the society may as well espouse the unjust views of the major, so as the rightful interests as the minor party, and may possibly be turned against both parties. So yeah, having a king is bad because they can pretty much do whatever they want, and they may just be prejudiced as well. The second method will be exemplified in the Federal Republic of the United States. Whilst all authority in it will be derived from and dependent on the society itself will be broken into so many parts, interests, and classes of citizens that the rights of the individual or of the minority will be in little danger from interested combination of the majority. And this is kind of true. I mean, throughout history, obviously there's been so much racial discrimination, but because of our founding fathers and them writing this down, we have been able to point out the hypocrisy of that and secure minority rights. And we're still working on that fight, but that's why education, civil education, is so important, so that when someone who, conservatives tend to deify, which means make into God, the founding fathers, when they do that, point at this document and point about how important it was to the founding fathers that minority rights be secured. The founding fathers want DEI. Like, say that to them and ask if they've read Federalist 51. In a free government, the security for civil rights must be the same as that for religious rights. It consists in the one case of the multiplicity of interest, and in the other. Okay, I need to reread that. My fire is so distracting. In a free government, the security for civil rights must be the same as that for religious rights. Yeah, okay. It consists in one case in the multiplicity of interest, and in the other the multiplicity of sex. I agree with this in theory. The problem is people are saying that their religious rights allow them to go against civil rights, like that gay baker, well, the homophobic baker who wouldn't bake for gay weddings, and then so that's where it gets complicated. The degree of security in both cases will depend on the number of interests in sex, and this may be presumed to depend on the extent of country and number of people comprehended under the same government. This view of the subject must particularly recommend a proper federal system to all the sincere and considerate friends of Republican government, since it shows that in the exact proportion as the territory of the Union may be formed into more circumscribed confederacies or states oppressive combinations of majority will be. I'm going to keep it real with you guys. I zoned out as I was reading that, so I'll read it again. Sorry. This view of the subject must be particularly recommended a proper federal system to all the sincere and considerate friends of the Republican government, since it shows that in exact proportion as the territory of the Union may be formed into more circumscribed confederacies. So confederacies are loose associations of states. Before our current government, we had the Articles of Confederation, which were too loose, and they failed because they couldn't secure economic security to the states. The states' oppressive combinations of a majority will be facilitated. The best security under the Republican forms for the rights of every class of citizens will be diminished, and consequently the stability and independence of some member of the government, the only other security, must be proportionally increased. So pretty much I guess this is talking about tyranny, and when the states and public are losing power, a different branch of government must increase, which is what we're seeing. What needs to happen now? The legislator and the public and these corporations, they need to stand back against Trump. Um, it's ridiculous that they have some guy just faking economic numbers, and corporations are kissing Trump's ass and giving him rings or giving him gifts and stuff when like they rely on accurate economic numbers for their business functioning. Anyway, um, justice is the end of government. It is the end of civil society. Not the end like it will finish it. It's the end, it's like the goal of government. It ever has been and ever will be pursued until it be obtained, or until liberty be lost in the pursuit. So the pursuit of happiness. In a society under the forms of which the stronger faction could readily unite and oppress the weaker, anarchy may as truly be said to reign as in a state of nature. So if you've read John Locke, this is his state of nature that he's talking about, where it's survival of the fittest, where the weaker individual is not secured against the violence of the stronger, and, as in the later state, even the stronger individuals are prompted by the uncertainty of their condition to submit to a government which may protect the weak as well as themselves. So, in the former state, will the more powerful factions or parties be gradually induced by like motive to wish for a government which will protect all parties, the weaker as well as the more powerful. This is what we're seeing now. We're starting to see that you need to protect trans people, disabled people, women or people of color, women, everyone. Otherwise, we all go down. Um, yeah. It can be little doubted that if the state of Rhode Island was separated from the Confederacy and left to itself, so the smallest state, the insecurity of rights under the popular form of government within such narrow limits would be displayed by such reiterated oppressions of factitious majorities that some power altogether independent of the people will soon be called for by the voice of the very factions whose misrule has proved the necessity of it. I'm not going to reread that. Pretty much, I need to be done with this soon. Pretty much what he's saying is, well, I guess I will reread it. It can be little doubted that if the state of Rhode Island was separated to the smallest state, the insecurity of rights under the popular form of government with such narrow... So it just wouldn't work if the smallest state left. In the extended Republic of the United States, and among the great variety of interests, parties, and sects which it embraces, a coalition of a majority of the whole society could seldom take place on any other principles than those of justice and the general good. General good, good for everyone. Whilst there being thus less danger to a minor from the will of a major party, there must be less pretext also to provide for the security of the former, by introducing into the government a will not dependent on the latter. I hate how they use latter and former, because then you have to fucking do math, and at least don't have such long sentences, bro. Okay. Or in other words, a will independent of the society itself. It is no less certain than it is important, notwithstanding the contrary opinions which have been entertained, that the larger the society, provided it lie within a practical sphere, the more duty capable it will be of self-government. So, maybe we're seeing this now. I see a great correction happening, and maybe that's a good thing. I don't know. And happily for the Republican cause, the practical sphere may be carried to a very great extent by judicious modification and mixture of the federal principle. Okay, so I kind of went through stuff line by line, so we won't do too much of a debriefing here. I think some things that, next time you're debating your conservative uncles, ask them if they've read Federalist 51, because, they like the Founding Fathers, and I will clip that line. Where is it? Well, throughout it, he talks about minority rights, but say that, and you can even, pull up right here, I guess this line, avalon.yale.edu, this line right here, or just Control F all the times they talk about minorities. And say that, one of the founding greatest founding documents of our country, Federalist 51, which every poli-sci major will read. Even if you're not a poli-sci major, a lot of people will read this in English to learn about rhetoric and essay writing. It talks about how important minority rights are, and the founding fathers were for DEI. Like, they can't, and that's gonna piss them off. Um, but if you like, it depends on how you approach it, and maybe if you like prompt it as, "Hey, I read this cool thing about the founding documents and the founding fathers. I know you like really love America. Do you want to read it with me?" And then you go into it, and then you're like, "Oh, it seems like the founding fathers are for DEI or something." That would kind of like break their brains a little. Um, but yeah, I'm gonna clip this section. I don't know why I'm telling you guys that, because if you're hearing this, then you watched all the way. I'm going to end this because I really want to upload it now and tend to my fire. Thank you so much, and remember to always stay cozy.